In the autumn of 1843, on the Rosefield Plantation of South Carolina. The masters believed their power was eternal. They believed fear and the lash would keep every soul in line. But one night in the slave quarters, violence erupted on by dawn. The overseers spoke of hearing voices calling from the darkness, voices that belonged not to the living, but to the dead. The Rosefield Plantation stretched across thousands of acres of fertile South Carolina land. Cotton fields rolled into the distance, broken only by the skeletal outlines of pine and oak. To the outside world, Rosefield was a symbol of wealth and Southern aristocracy. But to the men and women forced to work its soil, it was a place of hunger, sweat, and unending cruelty. Among them was Samuel. He was 30 years old that year, hardened by decades of toil. His back bore scars from whips, his palms were thick with calluses, and yet his eyes carried a quiet defiance. Samuel had never known freedom. Born on the plantation, he had seen his mother die young from exhaustion, his brothers sold away to distant farms. What remained was his silence, his endurance, and his ability to listen. The masters of Rosefield were the Harper family. Old Judge Nathaniel Harper owned the land, but his sons ran it with a mixture of arrogance and violence. The eldest, Thomas, was the most feared. He was tall, gaunt, with a face as sharp as a blade. Where others punished reluctantly, Thomas seemed to savor it. A dropped bale of cotton, a missed sunrise Bellany excuse, was enough for him to draw the whip across someone's back. Samuel learned to lower his gaze when Thomas passed, but in the quarters at night, when the fields fell quiet, Samuel listened. That was when whispers began to stir. Some said the ghosts of dead masters wandered the halls of Rosefield, bound to the plantation for their sins. Others whispered of rebellion, of blood debts waiting to be collected. And in those whispers, Samuel began to hear his own thoughts echoed back at him. Life at Rosefield was relentless. The dawn horn dragged men and women into the fields before the first hint of light. Cotton tore at their hands, the sun blistered their skin, and the overseer's shouts cut deeper than the thorns. Food was meager cornmeal, salted scraps, stale bread. Nights offered little relief. The slave quarters were small wooden shacks, packed tight with bodies, the air thick with heat and smoke. Yet the quarters were also the only place where voices could rise above the lash. Here, after dark, men and women whispered stories of the old world Africa, freedom, ancestors who walked with them in spirit. They whispered of the dead who watched from the shadows, their voices carrying warnings, their songs urging courage. Samuel had always dismissed such tales as superstition, a way to endure the unbearable. But that year something shifted. Strange things began to happen. At night, overseers claimed to hear footsteps around the big house, though no tracks were found in the dirt. Dogs barked at nothing, straining against their chains. And then came the disappearances. The first was a minor overseer, a man named John Albright. One night, after drinking heavily, he staggered toward the quarters to demand obedience. He never returned. The next morning, his hat was found near the cabins, but no body, no blood. His name was quietly scratched from the Harper records. The Harpers grew nervous, but they dismissed it publicly. The fool likely ran from debts, Thomas sneered. But in the quarters, the whispers grew louder. Some said John had been taken by spirits of the enslaved who had died on the land. Others claimed Samuel had led men in silence, hiding the body where no dogs could track. The second disappearance could not be ignored. Caleb Harper, the younger son, had taken a young enslaved woman into the fields after dark. She returned bruised and shaking. Caleb never came back. His horse wandered home alone, saddle stained with dirt. For the Harpers, this was a humiliation, a terror. Their own blood had vanished into the very quarters they ruled. By then, Samuel had stopped dismissing the whispers. He felt them coil around him at night, soft and insistent. "It is time," they seemed to say, "the dead walk with you. The master's sins demand a reckoning," and so the night came. It was late October. The air carried the bite of autumn, though the fields still clung to their last crop. That evening, the Harpers drank deep in the big house, trying to smother their unease. But in the quarters, a different fire burnt. Samuel sat among his people, his voice steady, his eyes fierce. "Tonight," he whispered, "they will learn fear." The elders sang low, their voices weaving with the night wind. Children were hushed, doors barred. Men and women moved like shadows, their tools and hands ready. Near midnight, Thomas Harper strode toward the quarters, whip in hand, fury in his eyes. He shouted into the dark, demanding his brother's return, cursing the savages who he believed had betrayed him. His voice carried across the cabins. Then it stopped. No one outside the quarters saw what happened, but the screams were heard. High, ragged, torn from a throat that had once laughed at suffering. The dogs howled, the wind rattled the shutters. And then silence. When the master awoke the next morning, Thomas was gone. The quarters were still, and the voices began. Slaves spoke of hearing him that night, his voice echoing from the dark corners of the cabins. Calling out, begging, cursing. Overseers swore they heard the Harpers' dead sons whispering near the fields, their voices rising and fading like smoke. Even Judge Nathaniel, the patriarch, was said to have sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, swearing he heard Thomas's voice outside his window, whispering his name. Fear gripped Rosefield. The masters tightened their grip, punishing the enslaved with harsher chains, harsher whips. They called in patrols. They scoured the land, but no bodies were found. No trace of Thomas, no trace of Caleb, no trace of Albright. Only the echoes remained, carrying on the night wind. Samuel said little. He bent his back in the fields, his face unreadable, but in the quarters the people knew it. They knew the voices were not ghosts, but memories haunting reminders of men who believed themselves untouchable and learned, too late, that even slaves could strike back. The Harpers never recovered. Judge Nathaniel died within a year, his heart failing under the weight of loss and fear. Rosefield Plantation was divided, its lands sold off, its name fading from history books, but the story lived on. Whispers carried it through generations of Samuel, who listened to the dead and gave them their reckoning, of the masters whose voices echoed after their deaths, warnings to those who believed cruelty would last forever. Historians today debate what truly happened on Rosefield Plantation in 1843. Some say the disappearances were escapes, that overseers fled debts and Caleb ran from shame. Others argue it was rebellion swift, secret, and carefully hidden. But in the oral traditions of the enslaved, the story is far darker, more poetic. The dead themselves rose through Samuel, demanding justice, and so the legend survives. The Rosefield voices still echo in South Carolina folklore phantom whispers of masters calling from the quarters they once ruled. A reminder that no power lasts forever. This was Samuel's story, one of pain, of resistance, and of justice cloaked in mystery. But his story is only one among thousands, most of which remain untold. If you want to uncover more hidden stories of slavery and resistance, watch this playlist here. And if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe, so history's silenced stories can finally speak again.